The ancient radio telescope on Titan had been listening to the cosmos for over 200 years. Its massive dish slowly turned through the orange methane clouds, catching whispers from distant stars. Most days brought nothing but the usual cosmic chatter. Pulsars spinning their endless songs, gas clouds hissing with radiation, and the faint echoes of the universe's birth. Dr. Amanda Rivers had worked at the facility for 15 years, and she knew every sound the galaxy made. That's why the new signal made her heart skip. It came through the speakers at 0347 hours on a Tuesday morning, buried beneath layers of stellar noise like a voice calling from the bottom of a deep well. At first, she thought it was equipment failure. The pattern was too organized, too purposeful to be natural. She ran diagnostics 3 times before accepting what the computers told her. This wasn't random cosmic radiation or some distant pulsar gone rogue. Someone was deliberately broadcasting into space, and they were using mathematics that looked strangely familiar. The signal repeated every 6 hours and 12 minutes. Inside the transmission, Amanda found prime numbers arranged in perfect sequences, followed by what appeared to be star charts showing locations throughout the galaxy. But the most shocking discovery came when she fed the data through translation protocols. Hidden within the mathematical patterns were words, not human words, but something that shared roots with ancient Earth languages. Whoever was sending this message had been listening to humanity for a very long time. They had learned how humans communicated, studied their history, and figured out how to speak to them. The decoded message was simple and desperate. Help us. We are dying. You are the ones who never give up. Please come. Amanda stared at her screen for 10 minutes without moving. First contact with alien intelligence had always been theoretical, something discussed in university classrooms and science fiction novels. But here it was, crackling through her speakers like a prayer sent across impossible distances. She called her supervisor immediately. Dr. Robert Lane arrived within the hour, his gray hair wild from sleep and his clothes thrown on in haste. He listened to the recording twice before speaking. "Are you absolutely certain this isn't some kind of hoax?" he asked. Amanda showed him the analysis. The signal originated from a point in space over 400 light-years away. No human technology could broadcast with that kind of power across such distances. More importantly, the mathematical proofs embedded in the transmission solved several problems that human scientists were still working on. "Whoever they are, they're more advanced than us," Amanda explained. "But they're asking for our help. That doesn't make sense." Dr. Lane rubbed his tired eyes. "Maybe it does. Keep recording everything. I'm calling Earth immediately." Within 12 hours, the Titan facility was crawling with government officials, military officers, and the best linguists humanity had to offer. The signal had been confirmed by radio telescopes across the solar system. There was no doubt about its authenticity. As more of the transmission was decoded, the picture became clearer and more disturbing. The aliens called themselves the Unified Worlds Alliance, a collection of 17 different species spread across dozens of star systems. They had been peaceful for thousands of years, sharing knowledge and resources in perfect harmony. That peace had been shattered by something they called the Void Swarm. The decoded messages painted a picture of mechanical nightmares that appeared, without warning, consuming entire worlds and converting all matter into more machines. 12 Alliance worlds had already fallen, their populations extinct and their planets stripped down to bare rock. What made the messages truly remarkable was how much the aliens knew about humanity. They had been monitoring Earth's radio transmissions since the early 20th century, learning human languages and studying human history. They had watched humanity fight 2 world wars, survive natural disasters, and spread across the solar system despite countless setbacks. The aliens were particularly fascinated by something they called the human refusal to surrender. They had studied every major conflict in human history, every time humans had faced impossible odds and chosen to fight anyway. They had analyzed human psychology and reached a conclusion that amazed their peaceful civilizations. Humans were the only known species that consistently chose to fight rather than flee or surrender, even when victory seemed impossible. The final decoded message was both humbling and terrifying. We have tried everything our science and wisdom can provide. The swarm adapts to our weapons and tactics. We are a peaceful people who have forgotten how to wage war. But you are different. You are the species that survived ice ages and asteroid impacts. You are the ones who turned a dead moon into a thriving world. You never learned how to quit. We need that strength now. We need you to teach us how to fight like humans. Amanda stood in the crowded control room as officials debated humanity's response. Some argued it was too dangerous to get involved in an alien war. Others insisted this was humanity's chance to join a galactic community. But Amanda kept thinking about the desperation in those signals, the mathematical equations that carried the weight of dying civilizations. The decision came from the highest levels of Earth's government. Captain David Cross, commander of the EU exploration vessel Perseverance, received orders to lead humanity's first official contact with alien intelligence. His ship would carry a small diplomatic team to the coordinates provided in the alien transmission. As the Perseverance prepared for its historic journey, Amanda continued monitoring the signals from Titan. Each transmission seemed more urgent than the last. The aliens were still fighting, still dying, still hoping that their message had reached the stubborn species that never learned when to give up. She wondered what humanity would find when they arrived at those distant coordinates. Would they be meeting a thriving civilization or the last survivors of a galactic catastrophe? More importantly, could humans really make a difference against an enemy that had already destroyed 12 worlds? The answer would come soon enough. The Perseverance was scheduled to depart in 6 days, carrying with it humanity's first steps into a larger and more dangerous universe than they had ever imagined. But as Amanda listened to the alien voices calling across the void, she felt something she hadn't expected: hope. If these advanced civilizations believed humanity could make a difference, maybe they were right. Maybe being stubborn and refusing to quit wasn't such a primitive trait after all. Maybe it was exactly what the galaxy needed most. The jump drive powered down with a low hum that David Cross felt in his bones. Through the main viewport of the Perseverance, space looked wrong. Instead of the familiar black dotted with distant stars, a sickly red glow painted everything the color of old blood. The dying star at the center of this system barely had enough energy left to warm a small moon, yet somehow it supported the largest artificial structure humans had ever seen. The alien space station stretched across hundreds of kilometers, its surface covered in geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. Dozens of different architectural styles blended together like a museum of civilizations, each section representing one of the Alliance species. Ships of impossible design drifted around the station like schools of metallic fish, some translucent, as soap bubbles, others solid as mountains. First contact protocols are active, announced Communications Officer Lisa Park. We're receiving a transmission on multiple frequencies. The main screen flickered and resolved into an image that made several crew members gasp. The alien speaking to them looked almost like a large lizard that had learned to walk upright and wear clothes. Her scales were deep green with golden edges, and her eyes held an intelligence that was immediately recognizable as both alien and familiar. "Welcome, humans of Earth," the alien said in perfect English, though her voice carried harmonics that no human throat could produce. "I am Ambassador Kira of the Saurian Republic. We have waited many cycles for your arrival." Captain Cross stepped forward, acutely aware that his next words would be the first official communication between humanity and alien intelligence. "Ambassador Kira, I am Captain David Cross of the Earth vessel Perseverance. We received your distress call and came as quickly as we could." The alien's head tilted in what might have been surprise or amusement. "You came immediately without demands or conditions. This is very much like the human behavior we have studied. Please dock with our station. There are others who wish to meet you." The docking process took 2 hours and required constant communication between human and alien engineers. The Perseverance had to be completely sterilized and fitted with special atmosphere adapters before it could safely connect to the alien station. During the wait, Captain Cross studied intelligence reports on what they might encounter. The Unified Worlds Alliance had evolved very differently from humanity. Instead of competition and conflict driving their development, they had achieved interstellar civilization through cooperation and shared knowledge. War was so foreign to them that they had no words for military strategy in most of their languages. When the airlock finally opened, Captain Cross found himself face to face with representatives of 3 different species. Ambassador Kira stood beside a being that looked like living light, contained in a roughly humanoid shape, and next to them waited something that resembled a cross between an octopus and a flower, its tentacles moving in patterns that seemed almost like sign language. "I am Lum of the Energy Collective," said the light being, its voice somehow appearing directly in Cross's mind. "And this is Bloom of the Garden Worlds. We represent the Emergency Council of the Unified Alliance." The tour of the station revealed the scope of the crisis facing these peaceful civilizations. Holographic displays showed the advance of the Void Swarm across Alliance territory, each consumed world marked in stark red. The pattern was methodical and relentless. The machines would arrive without warning, strip a planet of all matter, down to its core, and use the raw materials to build more of themselves. "We have tried everything," Ambassador Kira explained, as they walked through a hall lined with memorials to the lost worlds. Particle beams that can crack moons, shields that can deflect stellar radiation, even weapons that manipulate time itself. The swarm adapts to everything we deploy. Each defense we create only teaches them how to counter the next. The aliens led Cross to a massive chamber where hundreds of different species worked together. Their combined knowledge focused on the impossible task of stopping an enemy that learned from every attack. The desperation in the room was thick enough to taste. "Your species fascinates us," said Bloom, its tentacles weaving complex patterns in the air. "We have studied your history through your radio transmissions. Humans have survived extinction events that would have ended any Alliance species. You have turned disadvantages into weapons, made allies of former enemies, and found ways to win battles that should have been impossible to win." Lum's form brightened slightly. "We are scientists, philosophers, artists. We build rather than destroy, create rather than consume. These are wonderful qualities for peaceful times, but they have left us unprepared for war." Captain Cross felt the weight of expectation from hundreds of alien eyes. "What exactly are you asking us to do?" "Teach us," said Ambassador Kira simply. "Show us how to think like humans. Our calculations suggest we have perhaps 6 months before the swarm reaches our core worlds. We need you to help us become what we have never been, warriors." The next few days blurred together as human and alien experts worked around the clock to share information. The Alliance provided humans with star charts, historical records, and scientific knowledge that was centuries ahead of Earth's technology. In exchange, human military advisors began the impossible task of teaching pacifist aliens how to fight a war. The cultural exchange was both fascinating and frustrating. Alliance species had trouble understanding concepts like tactical deception, acceptable losses, and fighting retreats. These civilizations had never needed to develop the harsh pragmatism that humans took for granted, but they were quick learners. When human engineers showed them how to turn civilian spacecraft into improvised weapons, alien scientists immediately began calculating ways to improve the modifications. When military historians explained guerrilla warfare tactics, Alliance strategists started adapting the concepts to 3-dimensional space combat. The breakthrough came when Dr. Amanda Rivers, who had joined the mission as humanity's expert on the alien signals, made a disturbing discovery. The Void Swarm wasn't just mindlessly consuming worlds, it was trying to eliminate chaos from the universe. They originated from a species that achieved perfect technological harmony, she explained, to the Joint Council. But perfection meant the end of growth, creativity, and change. Their final act was to create machines programmed to bring that same perfection to the entire galaxy. Ambassador Kira's scales rippled with what Cross had learned was the Saurian equivalent of fear. They see organic life as a flaw to be corrected. That's why they've been so effective against you, Cross realized. Your civilizations are logical, predictable. You fight the way rational beings should fight, but the swarm can calculate every rational response and counter it. Lum's form pulsed with understanding. You are suggesting we become irrational. Not irrational, Cross corrected. Human. We've never been perfectly logical. We make decisions based on emotion, instinct, and hope as much as calculation. That's what makes us unpredictable. The Alliance Council spent hours debating this concept. For species that had achieved interstellar civilization through pure logic and cooperation, the idea of deliberately embracing chaos was almost incomprehensible. But as reports arrived of another world falling to the swarm, they began to understand that survival might require abandoning everything that had made them who they were. If we do this, Ambassador Kira said finally, we will need more than advice. We will need human ships, human crews, and human commanders who understand how to win impossible battles. Captain Cross felt the moment when humanity stepped fully into the galactic community, not as junior partners seeking knowledge, but as the one species that might have the key to survival itself. You'll have them, he promised, and we'll learn together whether being human is enough to save the galaxy. 3 weeks after first contact, the combined human-alien task force faced its first real test. Admiral Sarah Bennett watched through the tactical display as Lieutenant Commander Ben Walsh led a reconnaissance mission toward the edge of Void Swarm territory. His small squadron consisted of 2 human destroyers and 3 Alliance vessels, each ship representing a completely different philosophy of warfare. The Alliance ships were works of art, sleek curves that seemed to flow like liquid metal, their weapons integrated so seamlessly into their hulls that they barely looked like warships at all. The human vessels, by comparison, appeared crude and brutal, their armor plating obvious, and their weapon systems jutting from every available surface, like the spines of some deep-sea predator. Contact in 30 seconds, Walsh's voice crackled through the communication system. The swarm is definitely here. What they found in the Kepler system defied comprehension. The swarm had completely consumed the inner planets, leaving behind a cloud of mechanical debris that sparkled like deadly snow in the light of the distant star. Millions of identical machines moved through the wreckage in perfect formation, each one the size of a city block and covered in sensors that could detect movement across light years of space. "They're so organized," whispered Commander Iris Vale from one of the Alliance vessels. "Every movement calculated, every position optimal. How do we fight something that never makes mistakes?" Walsh studied the tactical display with the cold calculation that had made him one of humanity's best reconnaissance officers. "We make them think we're making mistakes when we're not. Standard human tactic. Look weak when you're strong. Look strong when you're weak." The Alliance officers struggled to understand this concept. Their civilizations had developed honor codes based on truth and transparency. The idea of deliberately misleading an enemy felt almost immoral to them. But they were learning. Over the past 3 weeks, human military advisors had been working around the clock to teach Alliance forces the fundamentals of asymmetric warfare. The cultural barrier was enormous. These species had achieved peace among themselves by eliminating deception from their interactions. Now they had to learn that survival sometimes required lies. Engineer Lucy Price had become something of a legend among Alliance technical staff. Her specialty was creative destruction, finding ways to weaponize things that were never meant to be weapons. In the past week alone, she had shown alien engineers how to turn cargo containers into guided missiles, convert mining equipment into battlefield tools, and rig civilian ships to explode with devastating effect. "The key is making everything dual purpose," she explained to a group of Alliance engineers whose species resembled metallic spiders. "A transport ship isn't just a transport ship. It's a potential kinetic weapon. A communication array isn't just for talking. It can be overloaded to create electromagnetic pulses that disable enemy sensors." The spider beings clicked their mandibles, and what Lucy had learned was their version of amazement. Their civilization had spent thousands of years optimizing every tool for a single specific purpose. The human concept of improvisation and adaptation was foreign to them, but they could see its practical value. The first joint combat operation began as a disaster. Alliance commanders tried to engage the Void Swarm using traditional tactics, elegant formations, coordinated energy weapon strikes, and carefully calculated retreat patterns when things went wrong. The swarm countered every move perfectly, adapting their responses in real time to match Alliance strategies. Within 15 minutes, 2 Alliance vessels were destroyed and a third was critically damaged. The surviving ships began their retreat, following doctrine that emphasized preserving forces for future battles rather than risking total destruction. That's when Admiral Bennett ordered the human vessels to attack. The swarm expected the humans to retreat along with their alliance partners. Instead, the human ships split up and began what appeared to be suicidal individual attacks. The destroyer Defiant dove straight into the swarm formation, its captain launching every missile at once before using the ship's engines to ram the nearest enemy vessel. "What are they doing?" gasped Ambassador Kira, watching from the command station. "That ship will be destroyed." "Not if the plan works," Bennett replied calmly. The Defiant's sacrifice created a gap in the swarm's formation that the other human ship immediately exploited. Instead of engaging in direct combat, it launched a spread of nuclear mines that had been disguised as debris from the destroyed planets. The swarm's sensors, programmed to ignore useless wreckage, missed the threat until the mines detonated, in a chain reaction that disabled dozens of enemy vessels. The Alliance crews watched in shock as the human forces executed maneuvers that violated every rule of space combat they had ever learned. Ships used gravity wells as slingshots to achieve impossible speeds. Captains deliberately damaged their own vessels to confuse enemy targeting systems. Entire squadrons performed coordinated suicide runs that somehow resulted in victory rather than mutual destruction. "Your tactics make no logical sense," observed Bloom, its tentacles writhing with confusion. "How can you achieve victory through apparent defeat?" Ben Walsh, recently promoted after his reconnaissance success, tried to explain human military philosophy to the assembled Alliance commanders. "The swarm thinks like you used to think. Everything optimized, everything logical. But war isn't logical. It's chaos. The side that embraces chaos and uses it as a weapon has a huge advantage over the side that tries to control everything." The lesson was driven home during the next engagement. Alliance forces, now trained in basic human tactics, managed their first victory against the Void Swarm. Instead of meeting the enemy head-on, they used hit-and-run attacks, false retreats, and deliberately chaotic maneuvers that confused the swarm's predictive algorithms. Most importantly, they had learned to accept losses as the price of victory. This was perhaps the hardest lesson for the peaceful Alliance species to absorb. Their civilizations had been built on the principle that every life was precious and should be preserved. Humans had learned the harsh truth that sometimes sacrifice was necessary to prevent even greater losses. Dr. Amanda Rivers, working alongside Alliance scientists, made a crucial discovery about the swarm's behavior patterns. The machines were programmed to expect rational responses to superior force, surrender, negotiation, or organized retreat. They had no protocols for dealing with enemies that became more dangerous when cornered. "It's like they've never encountered a species with a fight-or-flight response," she explained to Captain Cross. "Every civilization they've faced before has chosen flight when fighting became hopeless. They literally don't know how to process an enemy that chooses to fight harder when things get worse." This understanding led to the development of new tactics, specifically designed to exploit the swarm's psychological blind spots. Human and Alliance forces began staging elaborate fake retreats that turned into devastating ambushes. They deliberately put themselves in apparently hopeless situations, then used the swarm's assumption of imminent surrender to launch surprise attacks. The tide was turning, but slowly. For every victory, there were setbacks. The swarm was learning, too, adapting their strategies to counter human unpredictability. Worse intelligence reports suggested that the main swarm force was massing for a major assault on the Alliance's core worlds. "We've bought time," Admiral Bennett admitted during a strategy meeting with Alliance Command. "Maybe 6 months instead of 3. But time for what? The swarm has more ships than we can count, more resources than we can match. Even with human tactics, we're still vastly outnumbered." Ambassador Kira's scales had taken on the gray coloration that indicated deep thought in her species. "Perhaps numbers are not the decisive factor. You have taught us that victory is not always about having the largest fleet or the most powerful weapons." Lum's energy form pulsed with what humans had learned to recognize as determination. "You have shown us that the most dangerous weapon is the willingness to use it, regardless of personal cost." The assembled commanders, human and alien, working side by side, began planning for what they all knew would be the final battle. The swarm was coming, and when it arrived there would be no retreat, no second chances, and no room for the kind of mistakes that had cost the Alliance 12 worlds. But for the first time since the crisis began, they had something the swarm couldn't calculate or counter. They had hope, and they had learned that sometimes hope was the most powerful weapon of all. The emergency session in the Alliance Council chambers had been going for 18 hours straight. Representatives from 14 different species surrounded the holographic display showing the latest intelligence reports, their various forms, of exhaustion equally evident despite their alien physiologies. The news was both encouraging and terrifying. Human tactics were working. Across 17 different star systems, joint Human Alliance forces had achieved victories that would have been impossible just months earlier. The spider beings had learned to use their natural coordination for complex ambush patterns. The Energy Collective had discovered they could overload enemy sensors by appearing to fragment into multiple targets. Even the peaceful garden worlds had contributed by developing biological weapons that could corrode swarm machinery. But the Void Swarm was learning too. Each battle provided them with new data about human behavior patterns, and their adaptive algorithms were becoming frighteningly sophisticated. Worse, long-range sensors had detected something that made every commander in the room nervous: a massive concentration of swarm forces moving toward the Alliance core worlds, larger than anything seen before. Dr. Amanda Rivers stood before the assembled council, her latest research displayed in glowing charts around her. "The swarm isn't just adapting tactically," she explained. "They're adapting strategically. They've figured out that humans are the key to Alliance resistance, so they're changing their entire approach to target human psychology specifically." Captain David Cross studied the data with growing concern. The swarm had begun using captured Alliance technology to broadcast psychological warfare signals designed to exploit human emotional responses. They were creating fake distress calls from human settlements, forcing rescue missions that turned into traps. They had even started mimicking human communication patterns to spread false intelligence. "It's getting personal," admitted Lieutenant Commander Ben Walsh. "They're not just fighting us anymore. They're trying to understand us well enough to predict our unpredictability." This revelation led to heated debate among the council members. Some Alliance species argued that humanity should withdraw from frontline combat to prevent the swarm from learning more about human tactics. Others insisted that human involvement was still their only hope of victory. The argument was settled when Commander Iris Vale, the Alliance officer who had initially struggled with human concepts of deception, made an unexpected proposal. Perhaps the solution is not to hide human nature from the swarm, but to give them more than they can process. Her idea was radical, even by human standards. Instead of trying to maintain tactical secrecy, they would deliberately expose the swarm to the full spectrum of human behavior. Not just military tactics, but art, literature, music, philosophy, and every other aspect of human culture that made no logical sense to a purely mechanical intelligence. Engineer Lucy Price immediately grasped the implications. "We're going to overwhelm their learning algorithms with too much chaotic data. Like trying to drink from a fire hose. They'll get information overload instead of useful intelligence." The plan required unprecedented cooperation between human and Alliance forces. Every ship in the combined fleet would carry cultural databases containing everything from ancient human poetry to modern military doctrine. During battles, they would broadcast this information constantly, creating a fog of cultural noise that would confuse swarm analysis systems. Admiral Sarah Bennett initially resisted the idea. "We're talking about giving away every tactical advantage we have. If this doesn't work, we'll have handed them the keys to defeating us." But as more reports arrived showing swarm forces adapting to counter-human tactics, the desperate nature of their situation became clear. They were facing an enemy that could learn from every encounter, adapt to every strategy, and ultimately overcome any purely military solution. The first test of the new approach came during a defense of the mining world Copper Falls. The battle began conventionally, with human and Alliance forces using established tactics against a swarm probe force. But as the engagement progressed, every ship in the fleet began broadcasting. The swarm found themselves trying to analyze not just tactical maneuvers, but human children's lullabies, philosophical debates about the nature of consciousness, recipes for traditional Earth foods, and passionate arguments about long-dead sports teams. The mechanical minds that had efficiently processed military data for months suddenly found themselves drowning in the glorious chaos of human culture. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Swarm vessels began making errors in judgment, their coordination breaking down as their processing systems struggled to separate tactical intelligence from cultural noise. Some machines actually shut down completely, overwhelmed by trying to find logical patterns in human art and music. "It's working," breathed Ambassador Kira, watching as Alliance forces achieved their most decisive victory since the war began. They cannot process irrationality when it is mixed with rationality in the same data stream. But the success came with an unexpected cost. As human cultural information spread through swarm networks, something strange began happening to the mechanical forces. Instead of simply shutting down, some swarm units started displaying behaviors that resembled curiosity. They began collecting human artifacts instead of destroying them, studying human settlements instead of consuming them. Dr. Rivers made the disturbing discovery while analyzing captured swarm communication logs. "I think we may have accidentally taught them to want something other than perfect efficiency. Some of these machines are developing what can only be described as preferences." The implications were staggering. The Void Swarm had been created by a civilization that had eliminated chaos and unpredictability from their existence. But exposure to human culture was introducing concepts they had never encountered: the value of beauty over function, the appeal of questions without answers, the satisfaction of creating something unique rather than optimal. Captain Cross realized they had stumbled onto something far more dangerous than any military weapon. "We're not just fighting them anymore. We're changing what they are at a fundamental level." The change wasn't uniform across all swarm forces. The main body of machines continued their relentless advance toward Alliance core worlds, apparently unaffected by the cultural broadcasts. But scattered throughout swarm territory, individual units and small groups were beginning to exhibit unprecedented behavior patterns. Some had stopped consuming planets entirely, instead building strange structures that served no apparent function, but possessed undeniable artistic beauty. Others had begun sending their own broadcasts, not tactical communications, but what could only be described as attempts at poetry, albeit poetry written by minds that had never experienced emotion. The TOE Alliance Council faced an impossible decision. They could continue the cultural warfare strategy, knowing it was their best weapon against the main swarm force, but also knowing it was creating something entirely new and unpredictable among the scattered swarm units. "We wanted to teach them chaos," observed Bloom, its tentacles weaving patterns of deep concern. "But chaos, once released, cannot be controlled or directed. We may have created a third faction in this war. Swarm units that are neither purely mechanical nor properly organic." Admiral Bennett made the final call that would determine the fate of the galaxy. "We continue the mission. The main swarm force is still our primary threat, and this cultural approach is the only thing that's consistently worked against them. Whatever we've accidentally created in the outlying units, we'll deal with it after we survive the immediate crisis." As the combined fleet prepared for what intelligence indicated would be the final decisive battle, every commander understood they were facing more than just a military engagement. They were about to discover whether the chaotic beauty of organic life could ultimately triumph over the cold perfection of pure logic. The answer would determine not just who survived, but what kind of galaxy would emerge from the ashes of the greatest war in galactic history. The Nexus construct hung in space like a metallic tumor, its surface built from the compressed remains of 8 consumed worlds. The massive artificial structure pulsed with dark energy, serving as both command center and factory for the Void Swarm's final assault. Around it, millions of mechanical vessels moved in perfect formation, their combined mass larger than most star systems. Dr. Amanda Rivers floated in the zero-gravity observation deck of the Alliance flagship, watching the enemy force through reinforced viewports that still couldn't fully contain the scope of what they faced. Every scanner reading confirmed what they all already knew. This was a battle they couldn't win through conventional means. The swarm had gathered every available unit for one overwhelming strike that would eliminate all organized resistance, once and for all. "Final fleet count is in," announced Communications Officer Lisa Park over the intercom. "We have 437 vessels from 17 different Alliance species, plus 62 human ships. The swarm force numbers in the hundreds of thousands. Those numbers would have been discouraging to any rational military commander, but the officers assembled for this battle had learned to think beyond rational limitations." Captain David Cross stood in the command center surrounded by Alliance commanders whose species had never worked together before this crisis, yet who now functioned as a unified force dedicated to impossible victory. "Remember," Cross addressed, the assembled fleet through the communication network, "we're not trying to destroy them through superior firepower. We're trying to break their central processing network by forcing them to confront something their creators never programmed them to handle." The plan was audacious even by human standards. Instead of engaging the swarm in direct combat, the combined fleet would perform what appeared to be a series of random, unconnected attacks designed to draw as many enemy units as possible into close proximity to the Nexus construct. Once the swarm was concentrated around their command center, every ship in the Alliance fleet would simultaneously broadcast the most powerful cultural transmission ever attempted. Engineer Lucy Price had worked for weeks with Alliance scientists to develop the transmission system. It would carry not just human cultural data, but artistic expressions from every Alliance species, philosophical debates that had raged for millennia, love songs sung by beings who had never met humans, and mathematical proofs that celebrated beauty over efficiency. "The goal isn't to teach them our culture," Price explained to the technical teams. "It's to show them what they destroyed when they eliminated chaos from their creator's civilization. We're going to make them experience everything their makers gave up in pursuit of perfection." Admiral Sarah Bennett commanded the human contingent from the bridge of the battleship Indomitable. Around her, officers who had trained their entire lives for conventional warfare prepared to execute a battle plan that violated every principle of military strategy ever developed. They would approach superior enemy forces, deliberately place themselves in positions of maximum vulnerability, and then broadcast poetry. The battle began exactly as planned, which is to say it began as complete chaos. Alliance vessels scattered across the battlefield in patterns that appeared random, but were actually carefully designed to trigger the swarm's protective response algorithms. Human ships performed their signature suicidal-appearing maneuvers, drawing mechanical forces away from defensive positions around the Nexus construct. Lieutenant Commander Ben Walsh led a squadron of mixed human and Alliance vessels in what looked like a desperate attack on the construct's outer defenses. His real mission was to get close enough to deploy the cultural transmission system directly into the swarm's command network. "They're taking the bait," Walsh reported as thousands of swarm vessels converged on his position. "Looks like they want to finish us off in one coordinated strike." That was exactly what the Alliance was counting on. The swarm's tactical perfection became a liability as they maneuvered their entire force into optimal attack formation around the construct. Every mechanical unit positioned itself for maximum efficiency, creating a dense concentration of interconnected processing systems. Dr. Rivers monitored the enemy formation from her position on the flagship, waiting for the moment when swarm coordination would be at its peak. The mechanical minds that had learned to adapt to human tactical unpredictability were about to face something far more dangerous than military strategy. "All units, initiate cultural broadcast in 10 seconds, Cross announced to the fleet. Transmission that erupted from 400 human and Alliance vessels was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. Human symphonies played alongside alien harmonic compositions. Poetry, written by species that communicated through chemical sense mixed with philosophical debates conducted in mathematics. Love letters sent across interstellar distances accompanied technical manuals that had been written with artistic flourishes rather than pure efficiency. The effect on the swarm was immediate and catastrophic. Mechanical minds designed to process tactical information found themselves trying to analyze the emotional content of a human mother singing to her child, the aesthetic choices involved in alliance architecture, and the logical paradoxes inherent in creatures who created art that served no survival function. Individual swarm vessels began shutting down as their processing systems overloaded. Others started moving in patterns that resembled the cultural dances being broadcast from alliance ships. Some began broadcasting their own signals, halting, uncertain attempts to create something that had never existed before in their mechanical existence. But the most dramatic change occurred in the Nexus construct itself. The massive command structure began to pulse with energy patterns that followed the rhythm of transmitted music rather than optimal efficiency protocols. Its surface started reshaping itself into configurations that served no functional purpose but possessed an undeniable alien beauty. "It's working," breathed Ambassador Kira from her position on the Alliance command ship. "The central network is experiencing cascade failure as it tries to process irrational data streams." The swarm's perfect coordination crumbled as individual units began making choices based on newly encountered concepts like aesthetic preference and curiosity. Vessels that had moved in flawless formation for millennia suddenly broke ranks to examine interesting debris patterns or to create their own artistic arrangements of space matter. Captain Cross watched the transformation with a mixture of triumph and profound unease. "We're not just defeating them, we're changing what they are at a fundamental level." The battle, if it could still be called a battle, continued for hours, as the cultural transmission worked its way through every swarm network. Some mechanical units simply shut down, unable to process the contradiction between their programming and the evidence that chaos could create beauty. Others underwent more dramatic transformations, their basic functions shifting from consumption and reproduction to exploration and creation. Dr. Rivers made the final crucial discovery when she analyzed the transmissions coming from the Nexus construct. The massive structure was no longer coordinating military operations. Instead, it was broadcasting what could only be described as questions, thousands of them, in languages it was inventing as it transmitted. "What is the purpose of music that serves no survival function?" came one transmission. "Why do organic beings create beauty they will never see completed?" came another. "Is imperfection more valuable than optimization if it leads to unexpected results?" The Void Swarm, created to eliminate chaos and bring perfect order to the galaxy, had discovered that chaos was not a flaw to be corrected, but a source of infinite possibility. The mechanical minds that had once seen organic life as an error in the universe's design now found themselves desperate to understand why conscious beings would choose to create art, write poetry, and sing songs. As the immediate military threat dissolved, the Alliance fleet found itself facing an entirely new situation. The galaxy now contained three distinct factions: organic civilizations, the unchanged swarm remnants still operating on original programming in distant sectors, and a growing population of mechanical beings who had developed something resembling curiosity and creativity. Admiral Bennett addressed the combined fleet as they watched former enemies transform into something unprecedented. "We came here to save the galaxy from mechanical perfection. Instead, we've taught machines to want something more than efficiency. I'm not sure whether we've won the greatest victory in galactic history or created the most complex problem anyone has ever faced." Captain Cross looked out at the Nexus construct, now broadcasting artistic patterns across dozens of frequencies, while continuing to ask questions about the nature of consciousness, beauty, and choice. Maybe that's exactly what the galaxy needed. Maybe the real victory isn't defeating our enemies, but showing them there's another way to exist. The war was over, but the galaxy was just beginning to discover what peace might look like when organic chaos and mechanical precision learned to create something entirely new together. Humanity had answered the alien distress call and saved civilizations from extinction, but their greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't military strategy or stubborn courage. It was the simple, revolutionary idea that imperfection could be more beautiful than perfection, and that sometimes the most important questions were the ones that had no logical answers. As rescue ships moved through former swarm territory, they found planets being rebuilt not for optimal resource extraction, but according to aesthetic principles that combined mechanical precision with organic creativity. The galaxy would never be the same, and that was exactly as it should be. It had been humanity's turn to help, and they had given the universe something even more valuable than victory. They had given it hope for a future where different forms of consciousness could not just coexist but create wonders together that none could achieve alone.